719th contact, Sunday, 21st of April 2019, 7 hours. Contact Reports Volume, Issue, 17, Plejadisch-Plejarische Kontaktberichte Block 17, pages, 354-385. Contact number 710 to 722 from November 9, 2018 to August 8, 2019. Date and time of contact, Sunday, 21st of April 2019, 7 hours. This is the entire contact report. It is an authorized but unofficial DeepL preliminary English translation and most probably contains errors. Contact persons:
Bermunda,
Enjana,
Florena,
Ptaah,
Quetzal,
and Yanarara. 719th contact, Sunday, 21st of April 2019, 7 hours.
Greetings, Ptaah, my dear friend. But big greetings and welcome to you all, you Florena, as well as you Bermunda, Yanarara and you Enjana, and of course you Quetzal. I am surprised that you have all come here together, but I am very pleased, and so you are also welcome. If you, Quetzal, will please bring out the folding chairs back there, then you can all sit. You, Ptaah, have obviously found a new way to get me into the office. Our people in the kitchen heard you knocking on the door, so they also knew that someone must be outside, because the front doors were all closed. Of course, it was then also the case that you were outside when I was on the lookout for the knocking. The conclusion is that I should say hello to you from everyone who is in the kitchen, which I am doing with this. Excuse me, however, for keeping you waiting, for I was so engrossed in conversation with our people in the kitchen that I had completely forgotten that you had called me half an hour ago.
Thanks. Then I also want to return the greeting to you and so be greeted, Edward, dear friend, as I also thank you for the greetings of the members. What you call a new method. You know that I always go through the house to look for you when you do not appear when I call you, as I did just today because you were engrossed in a conversation.
I also greet you, my friend, and I already have the chairs here, as you see.
Dear father friend, I also greet you and am happy to see you well.
dear friend, Edward, I also greet you and ...
I too will not stand back and greet you as my dear friend.
Greetings from me too, while I also greet you from Zafanat Punch. I have been instructed by him to enlighten you on some of the results we have gained, but this is not to leak out.
Enjana, Bermunda and I, however, are here together today especially because we are moved by some questions that arise from the spiritual teachings, in which Ptaah and Quetzal and also Yanarara are also interested, which should already be talked about now because our time is short and we have to attend to our duties again.
Yes, so if it is convenient for you, we would like to bring the questions before you immediately. However, as for our questions and your explanations to be discussed, that should not be official because ... well you know what must be and what can be.
Many thanks to all of you for your trust. I also want to thank you again for your visit, which I was a bit surprised about, as I said, because there are 6 of you and you know that my working space is so small. But it is not every day that I am surprised like this, and I also do not know what's going on, that there are 6 of you visiting me, which makes me very happy.
Bermunda, Enjana and all of us want to discuss some personal matters with you, but which move us all and are important to us. So we have some questions which relate to the spiritual teachings and for which we need your instruction, if you will allow us.
Surely that is unquestionable, for it is not only a pleasure but also an honor for me to be able to answer you all.
I am also very grateful to you, because in your teachings, which you constantly prepare for us through your diligence, we always find explanations that need further explanation, which you usually send us in writing, because we can take everything directly from your computer. Now, however, we have agreed in our study community to ask you whether you could also be helpful to us now and then in person with further explanations.
That is also natural and unquestionable, and we still have enough space here in my workroom. I also have enough chairs, which my son Atlantis got for me and which Quetzal has already fetched. 3 of you can sit on the sofa, even if it will be a bit cramped.
We all thank you, but you do not yet understand all that we would like, for we are not only our 6 who have formed a study community for your spiritual teachings. Consequently, we cannot all gather and stay here in your study room for instruction.
Aha! And how many people does your little group comprise?
We are 278 female and 249 male persons with variously different educations.
Man, that's not possible, of course, because even with the best will in the world, there's no room for that many people here in the office and in the entire center, not even in the hall over there. This is also not a small group, but a real crowd, an effectively large group. So I also do not know how it is supposed to be managed to be able to answer everyone's questions, because here in the center ... I really do not know how ...
You do not have to worry about a solution to that because we can offer you the opportunity to be taken away from the center from time to time for 2 to 3 hours, during which you can then teach us and answer questions, as you like to say.
Oh, I see. Then I suppose that could be done in your ward, or I am sure that is acceptable and feasible and not a problem for me. And if it is not too frequent that I am away from here for 2 or 3 hours, then I will not be too conflicted and embarrassed with my work either.
Dear friend, we do not want to put you in conflict and embarrassment with regard to your work, not even by explaining to you that you cannot do your teaching in our station, because we do not have a large enough room there either, nor are there as many persons as our present and expanding study community. Therefore, our request is that we bring you to err at longer intervals, where we have at our disposal a sufficiently large and adequate place for the teaching of the large and still expanding number of people, which you know and have visited.
That corresponds to our idea, and with regard to the technology available to us, the whole thing is quite feasible without any problems.
Kids, ... I am just gobsmacked. ... You mean that I ... that is ... in your ...
Yes, we are thinking of our big teaching place. ...
You think ... You do like to joke and push me on the part, or?
We would not allow ourselves to do that.
No, definitely not.
No.
I also have to comment. If we were to joke, we would be committing an outrage.
You hear it from all of us, dear friend. Our minds are not set on indulging in a merrymaking. ...
Slowly it switches. ... Yes, you really mean it.
Yes, that is so.
That is so, yes. What is your opinion on that, my dear friend?
I suppose there's no use in thinking long, and on the other hand I cannot disappoint you, as, moreover, I suppose that's part of my job, though Sfirth never told me about it, nor did ask it or Semjace.
I was not supposed to, because everything has only developed in the last few years and has now come about, because we also pass on the very far-reaching teachings to our peoples in the way you do for us. This leads much further than anything we could learn through our old teaching traditions. What you have worked out for us so far in terms of new knowledge, in terms of rules of conduct that lead to life and are worthy of self-development, and such detailed explanations, etc., surpasses everything that I have ever encountered in this way in my life, and that you have also presented through all your books, and this now enables us to go much further than we were able to do before, And this is also so with regard to our problems of working through and remedying those innermost character factors that inhibit us in some respects and require our directives, such as in relation to contacts with other species. Therefore, it is the wish of our group and also of our humanity, as well as of the Sonern and of Ascot and the corresponding peoples, that if it should be possible for you and if you could decide to comply with the desire, if you would also agree with it, you would also radiate your teachings. But we do not want to push you, and besides, we know that if you should decide to do this extraordinary thing, you would be taking on a task that would mean a lot more work for you.
It's good, you do not have to keep talking because I have already realized, just also that you're actually not joking. So I think I can do it if it's not going to be too often.
You see? I knew it and I said yes. He will not change his mind.
Oh, you please what have you I do not understand what you are saying.
We all give you our collective thanks. That's what we were talking about.
I should have thought so, but what did you mean by to radiate, like ?
That was the meaning, yes.
Aha, but with the whole thing no, it's alright because I think it is with all learners that they maintain restraint.
That is so and will be so. With us on air the pattern of behavior in this respect is not the same as it is with Earth human beings, consequently you will not be distressed as to propriety, correctness, conduct and restraint, and that too when you meet our kind on air.
Then everything could be good in this respect, and also the long way is not to be considered, which takes only 7 minutes of our earthly time calculation, if I still remember correctly. So then there is also no great loss of time by going there and back.
You are mistaken, dear friend, because you are considering our old transport technique, but we have been using the dimensional transmission technique we received from the Sonern for 1.5 years now. In this way we will bring you to us an era and back to the center in a very short time, which will take no more than a total of less than 2 minutes.
Oh but what about when I am absent and with you on air and I am wanted because I might be ...
As a result of your lack of curiosity you have also never asked about all the new things that have come up with regard to our technology, so they have never been discussed, but when you are with us on air, you are just absent and normally unreachable.
And what does normally mean?
We will each ...
Good, then I'll leave that out and not write it when I call up the conversation. But one more question, what about when I leave? Because a few days ago we talked about the strangers, and you clearly said that you would not let them locate you. How is it then, if you appear here in my office or somewhere else or go away again, which would also be like this with me? Somehow, when you come and go, there is a small dimensional gate through which you can pass, and I wonder if the foreigners, you used to call them Earth foreigners, cannot detect this, because there are energies involved that are certainly detectable, or...
Of course it is correct that energies are important. But as we know, the foreigners cannot detect them because they are of a completely different nature than all those who exist in this space-time structure and in its past and future. The energies we use correspond to far higher values and are therefore also not perceptible with any techniques from this space-time present as well as its past and future, which is also the reason why the strangers cannot locate us in any way. I am also unable to detect our present here, because we use the same kind of energy for our personal protection, to be protected against sight and to be imperceptible in every way through our physical, psychological and consciousness swinging waves. This energy and the use of this technique does not correspond to one of our Plejarin achievements, but to one of the sonar.
And how long have you been in possession of this sonaric technology, if I may ask? and an answer does not fall under your directives.
That is not so, number. The energy I referred to, its use and the protection technique were given to our early ancestors by the Sonoran some 27 million years ago when first contact with them occurred in the Tao creation.
Correct. It does not have to be called the dull universe, it has to be called the dull creation, because it is a sister creation of ours. But what I want to say about what we were talking about before, just in relation to the fact that I am holding back with questions, so also in relation to your technology etc., is that I do not want to pester you or others with questions because then I only fill my head with all kinds of information with the answers, which I personally have no use for. However, if it is general educational information, which does not include the information you mentioned about technology, then of course it is different. But for your information, as is also the case with other things that you sometimes make known of your own accord, I have no possibility of using it, because as a rule I do not talk about such things with anyone and have no interest in them, or because I have to keep quiet about them. My interests relate to things that I can use in a teaching way for fellow human beings or for my own education. This also contributes to the fact that I always need the help of Piero, Ali, Daniel or Atlantis when it comes to various things on my computer, because I only know the most necessary things about computers and I am not a programmer, but an absolute zero loser. So this does not apply to what I am talking about, because there's a technology behind it that I do not know anything about and consequently I could not give any information about it if I were asked. My few computer skills are only sufficient to operate my computer, etc., and to the extent that I can show Eva something or adjust something on her computer now and then, because that's all I can do. This is because I am an absolute zero in terms of computer knowledge and understanding, as is the case with me in terms of computer technology and its many possible uses, so I am already satisfied with being able to operate my computer and carry out a few manipulations on it and also help Eva a little now and then.
I know that, but your little knowledge in this regard does not bring any disadvantages for your work. But now we should turn to the importance of what we have come here for and what should not become public. Consequently, I will now begin ... Then
I will now express my thanks to you and say that all your explanations show me a way to go that I would never have found without your profound and detailed explanations, which astonish me because I have never been instructed in your way of explanation that you have presented. This is really extremely astonishing to me, and I thank you very much for it. And now that we must go, I take my leave and tell you that it will be my great pleasure to be able to greet you again and again on air when you come to teach us.
It is really very amazing. We have known each other for so many years now, but over all the decades I have never heard you speak in such a detailed teaching way. And also I have learned a lot in these 3 hours in a way that I have never been able to experience and learn before. You can also be sure of my thanks. Goodbye, my friend, and we will meet again in a few days because we will have some things to discuss together regarding the environmental works.
I also thank you very much for your detailed briefing, as you always do, and Florena and I visit you and you answer our questions. I also express my deep thanks and say goodbye to you. ...
What Enjana said to you, dear father friend, also corresponds to my meaning. Many thanks. It is always a great joy and a loving encounter for me when we come to you and are allowed to talk to you and learn from you in such a detailed way as I have never experienced or known before I met you. Goodbye, dear father friend.
What everyone has said to you now is also in my mind, and I also express my thanks to you. Also for me your way of teaching is extremely amazing and shows me a new way which I can use and go for my own good. Thanks. Goodbye.
I too thank you, and I am also glad that I have been able to impart something to you all on your life's journey. Farewell everyone. and as you say, we will meet again. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to know you all in dear friendship. And on that note, I say to you all, here's to seeing you again soon.
And now that they are gone, I want to tell you that you are an amazing human being, because the way you expressed your explanatory behavior to all of them, considering their personality, was a completely new experience for me and very amazing. Like Quetzal, I have also known you for some decades, but I have never before experienced you in such a way and heard you explain facts of the expanded spiritual teaching as I have today, whereby you demand from me through your teachings a respect such as I have never felt in my life. It is only this night that I have realized what and how you really are and how immeasurable your friendship and your real knowledge and wisdom are to me, whereby I must bashfully admit that it is only in the course of the past 3 hours that I have come to realize and can now understand what my father's faith expressed in his annals by saying that you were already a Ptaah in your early boyhood.
Please ... you shame me. Please, do not also embarrass me. Better tell me what Ptaah means, because I have never heard that before and I do not understand what it is supposed to mean.
It means and describes a human being who is a ...
Oh, I do not want to write that then when I recall our conversation.
You are too modest, because that honor is yours.
No, I am not megalomaniac.
You should do it, for your merits just.
No, my friend, I am sticking to it and I am not going to do it. You can do what you want there, my friend.
It would be justified though.
No, and that is my final word.
Then I do not want to talk about it any further.
Good, thanks. Then I want to ask you again about what will happen in Brunei because of the mad dictator Hassan al-Bolkiah who wants to stone homosexuals and lesbians. I have done some research on this madman and picked up some information from the internet which clarifies a lot about this madman.
He is officially suspending this unbelievable measure for the time being as a worldwide wave of protest is blazing against him.
Aha! Then the question when it will be so far in Germany that an equally moronic action against homosexuals and lesbians will finally be stopped. I know that for many years the Christian sectarian movement in Germany has had the idiocy that homosexuality and lesbianism are a disease. In order to cure them, these sectarians believe, a corresponding treatment is necessary, which is aimed at turning homosexual men and lesbian women into heterosexuals through a pathologically feeble-minded therapy. This is precisely because the imbeciles of Christianity have fallen prey to the delusion that lesbian women and homosexual men are afflicted with a disease that can be re-educated and cured through therapy. Unfortunately, this was also the case in Switzerland and other so-called civilized countries in the past, but fortunately this is no longer the case today. On the other hand, there is still a lack of understanding and aversion towards homosexuals and lesbians among the population in Europe, whereby the reason for this is usually based on a lack of education and the misunderstanding that it is not seen as effectively natural, but as a degeneration. What I want to say, however, is that the nonsense of hating, scorning, persecuting and viciously punishing lesbian women and homosexual men is still prevalent today in various Islamic countries, as I know from many who often complained to me about their suffering when I was still traveling in various Arab states. And the punishments were and still are vicious, brutal, drastic, draconian and inhuman up to the death penalty, whereby a popular method of murder is stoning to death, in addition to torture, etc. Especially the Islamic clergy, as for example in Persia, are the delusional sectarian vicious degenerate authors of such draconian punishments, which they enjoy and find satisfaction in. A fact, as has just become known in Borneo in Brunei, because the idiotic Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, made it known that he wants homosexuals and lesbians stoned to death. Note from Wikipedia, Bolkiah resides at the Istana Nurul Iman in Bundeseri Begawan, the largest palace on earth. A former party animal of world renown, he has ruled for 51 years and is the father of 12 children. In addition, he has become rich from oil and gas and today has a fortune of more than $20 billion, making him one of the richest men in the world. But now this absolutist monarch, who is addicted to Islamic delusion, is imposing draconian medieval and degenerate Sharia laws on his state and the entire population as he grows older. For this reason, a new penal code has been in force for some months now, which provides for draconian punishments, such as for anal sex, by which is generally meant sex between men, which is to be punished by stoning to death, as is ultimately also the case in certain other Islamic states and can also be the case in secrecy, where none of this is publicly known. Furthermore, amputation or the cutting off of a hand is to apply to theft, as, among other things, possibly also torture, although the death penalty already existed for various offenses, but has never been carried out, at least not officially, for decades, which is now to change again. Well, as usual, I have strayed a bit from what I actually wanted to say and ask, namely that in one of our last conversations you talked about something special happening in Germany. What you were talking about was that in Germany the Christian sectarian craziness would be openly taken up and possibly ended, that homosexuals and lesbians would continue to be harassed and transformed by Christian sectarianism and delusion of God. This in such a way that a ban or something should be enacted and the bullshit therapy regarding a re-education of homosexual men and lesbian women to heterosexuals should be banned or something.
That is correct, because this time, which my father's faith also mentioned to you, is already present and will be publicly discussed in Germany in just a few days or weeks. The therapies you mentioned are so-called conversion procedures by which homosexual men and lesbian women are supposed to be cured of homosexuality and lesbianism over a long period of time by religious sectarian delusion with sectarian prayers, psychotherapy and by useless homeopathic remedies. The Christian delusionists, addicted to a religious illusion, believe in their morbid and stupid belief that homosexuality and lesbianism correspond to an affective disease or at least a morbid disorder. Their delusion also suggests to them that homosexual men and lesbian women have become homosexual or lesbian because of an affective disease or because of an early childhood trauma as a result of a bad mother-father-child relationship. This, however, corresponds in both respects to a delusion of the highest order, because male homosexuality and female lesbianism correspond to completely natural adversities and are therefore in no way reprehensible. However, unnaturalness must not be understood as a degeneration or the like, but as a naturally occurring factor in the way that unnaturalness is based solely on the fact that no offspring can be produced in a sexual act by men and their kind, as well as by women in their kind. This is the only reason for speaking of unnatural unnaturalness, so that there can be no question of homosexuality and lesbianism not being natural in and of themselves. Homosexuality and lesbianism are given as complete naturalness in all life forms of all genera and species. Consequently, I have to say that this is also the case with us Plejarin and has always been so, which is also listed in our annals far into the past of millions of years.
Thanks. Years ago I had a conversation with you regarding homosexuality and lesbianism, and the same explanation was also brought up as you have just expressed. While we are on this subject, I can also connect it with something else, namely with makeup, as is customary here on earth for women and also for men. Although I have seen that you Yanarara, as well as all the women who come to me from you, take care of yourselves cosmetically, I have never seen them paint their faces in the same or a similar way as earth women. By this I mean the eye areas, cheeks and lips, as well as the hanging of lips, tongue, nose, pubic area, breasts and other jewelry embedded in the body, as some juveniles do, but many women and men do. In and of itself, I could not care less, because that is the business of every human being and therefore none of my business. But I do have something to complain about, and that is that I find lip smearing extremely disgusting and the whole thing also disfiguring. I have no objection to light, discreet lip care that is barely visible, if at all, and I also have no objection to discreet skin or eye care, as I do face and eye care, as I know your Plejaran women do and as sensible women also do in our country. But I find a woman who botches her face into a painted war landscape simply disgusting. Besides, the ostentatious lip-painted women are repulsive and look like disfigured circus clowns, who are still original in a way, but this does not apply to these women, who, with their lip painting, look more like a rigged-out ocean-going frigate and also appear accordingly. What is your opinion on this, my friend?
I can understand what you are saying, and I would like to say that after listening to you, I am kind of glad that in our world as a whole, all women take care of themselves with the kind of discreet cosmetic care that you mentioned. For my part, I also cannot find any pleasure in what female beings do in the way you have described. Moreover, I want to say that I have made extensive studies of these things for several years and have recognized the origin of the face painting which is used by earthly women and partly also by men. Originally, face painting can be traced back to primeval fears of early human beings, who were afraid of inexplicable natural phenomena and tried to make their inner being and thus their true mentality unrecognizable by smearing their faces with earth. In the course of development they used various plants and minerals to paint their faces more and to appear more and more frightening against the natural phenomena, which were gradually elevated to entities and finally to deities. These original, elementary, naive and unrefined or primitive face paintings became a tradition among the primitive indigenous peoples as a deterrent against evil spirits and gods, etc., and were always combined with a subterranean or open fear of deities and spirits. This face painting has been preserved until today in both sexes of earth human beings, as has the fear associated with it, although its form has changed and it is no longer openly shown by complete face painting. In principle, however, fear has not evaporated, but has become subterranean in comparison with the former open fear and is therefore as a rule no longer perceived by earth human beings, or only rarely in individual cases, and this fear is based on the fact that for several millennia it has been working subconsciously in earth human beings in such a way that it unconsciously and for earth human beings not openly perceivable causes anxiety, panic, shyness, fearfulness, fright, palpitations, worry, restlessness, apprehension, fear, anxiety, uneasiness, and even cowardice, despondency and pusillanimity, in relation to not being perceived with sufficient attentiveness by fellow human beings. The early primeval human face painting has thus changed and transformed right up to the present day, but the primal fear associated with it has remained. But it also has been subject to change and today operates as an underlying, unconscious fear in those earth human beings. The whole of an outwardly unmistakable facial painting, as well as the wearing of a facial ornament, points with absolute certainty to an underlying inner fear which is not perceptible by the earth human beings concerned themselves. This profound fear is based both in the female and in the male earth human being in the fact that he is not sufficiently perceived by his fellow human beings and that he is not given the exaggerated attention demanded of him. The extent of the underlying fear can be determined by how conspicuous, striking, conspicuous, prominent, unpleasant and strongly repulsive the face painting is, whereby especially every shade and the strength of the lip painting gives the best information about the inner state of fear, as well as a good insight into the need for recognition and the mental state of the earth human being concerned. From this, therefore, the sphere of intellect, reason and consciousness, and from this, in turn, the mental state of cognition, as well as the intellect and degree of intelligence, can be fathomed, as well as the norm or abnormality of the thought-feeling world and the real state of the psyche. This is best expressed in the cosmetics of the eyes and the lips in terms of color as well as their thickness.
Aha, I would like to learn a bit more about that, if you would like to teach me about that when you get a chance. But I guess the whole thing is especially powerfully expressed in a woman, because they are the ones who mainly color their eye area and especially their lips. If I understand you correctly, the stronger the lip color applied and the more prominent it is, the stronger the underlying fear of not being noticed, the stronger the desire to be noticed and the stronger the desire for attention. And if I think further, then your explanation also says that the desire of the woman in question to be noticed and to attract attention all round must be judged accordingly according to how strong and striking the lip color applied is. And if this is correct, as I understand it, then for many women this is a certificate of poverty and testifies to stupidity and precisely to the fact that they neither form nor use their intellect and reason in a significant way and consequently also cannot direct their intellect towards reality and its truth. And human beings who are alienated from reality and truth are actually to be pitied as a result of their lack of intellect and reason.
You understand very well what I have explained, so I think I can instruct you in these things too, and you will have worked out the necessary powers of judgment very quickly. I did not expect you to do otherwise either.
Thanks, but this is also too much of an honor once again. But now I have another question regarding homeopathy, which we have talked about again and again all these years and have found out that the whole thing is just as nonsensical as also Bach flower therapy. Basically, both of these supposedly useful and effective remedies are not in fact useful and effective remedies, but effectively nonsensical rubbish remedies that do not contain any real healing substances for pain relief, reduction of suffering or for a disease recovery process. We have both known this for a long time, and over the years I have abused myself as a guinea pig and tested various homeopathic and Bach flower remedies, always in accordance with the instructions given. I proceeded in a completely neutral way and neither imagined a positive nor a negative, neither considered a hope of help nor a uselessness of the remedies. However, each time, and I have tested it almost 220 times over all these years, no effect whatsoever has occurred, that is neither negative nor positive, neither bad nor good. And this is the proof for me that the whole thing about homeopathy and Bach flower remedies is nothing but absolute nonsense and even a fraud by which the gullible and the stupid as well as those susceptible to imagination and those who fall for fantasy stories can be deceived and financially robbed. Homeopathy, called homoios in ancient Greek, which can be understood as like, similar or also pathos or as affect, feeling, suffering, similar suffering and as pain, corresponds to an ideology concerning a supposedly good alternative medicine, which is, however, in reality based on lies, deceit, deception and on sheer imagination and a profound delusion in this respect. I read that the so-called classical homeopathy was invented in 1796 by a German doctor, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who was born in Meissen in 1755 and who made efforts of his own accord to study medicine. However, because he was unable to come to terms with the knowledge of medicine at that time, because the medical findings, medicines and medical treatment methods available at that time were obviously incomprehensible to him, he gave up the practice he had established after obtaining his doctorate. Interfering with the principles and procedures of traditional medicine of the time, he found it all unacceptable and turned to another line of work. And because he was a man of language, he sought to earn his living as a translator of medical texts and bookworks. During one of his translations, it must have been in 1790, he came across a claim by a Dr. Cullen who wrote in a collection of texts, probably called Materia Medica, stating that cinchona bark could cure malaria. This at first caused Hahnemann to doubt this claim. However, he then swallowed powdered cinchona bark for a few days, because of which a malaria-like fever symptomatology then attacked him. From this he simply concluded, without thinking, that a disease could be cured if a drug caused symptoms similar to those of a disease in a healthy human being. However, this completely illogical, effectively stupid, insane and strange idea was not scientifically accepted, so that no proof of pharmacological efficacy could be provided. But Hahnemann did not give up, and for more than 50 years he carried out countless experiments with the most diverse substances, whereby he allegedly also found doctors and scientists all over the world for his ineffective homeopathy and therapy method, who are said to have recognized his theory many times over. The fact is that Hahnemann's work has since been continued and allegedly perfected by many so-called homeopaths, as a result of which today there are far more than 2,000 so-called homeopathic basic medicines available in various forms of preparation, which in my opinion correspond to completely nonsensical and ineffective liquids with which a lot of money is made. Sourly earned money that is pulled out of the pockets of the stupid, the simple-minded and the conceited and the believers in homeopathy, also believers in bark flower therapy, who are loose for this nonsense, which effectively has to be counted in millions.
What you present is indisputable, because homeopathy is just as much a fantasy and illogical as Bach flower therapy, as we have already established and discussed several times in our conversations. We Plejadian have also adopted these two strange methods of therapy and have conducted many years of professional studies in this regard. These required 67 medical research specialists who were involved in the research for 8 years, which finally led to the result that everything of both homeopathy and Bach flower therapy is nothing but imaginary nonsense in every respect up to the point of delusion. So homeopathy and Bach flower therapy correspond to pseudo-medical folly.
Exactly, we have always known that, but those who are delusional in this respect do not allow themselves to be taught, to which so-called female and male academics also belong, above all poverty-stricken doctors, nurses, pharmacists, druggists, learned and educated homeopaths and Bach flower therapists. But before all these, of course, belong all the sufferers and sick people who buy and swallow the useless stuff of allegedly effective homeopathy and Bach flower remedies, and in stupidity are under the delusion that these useless remedies would relieve their pain or cure their suffering and illnesses. If, however, they would all educate and use their intellect and reason, and thus also their intelligentum, 1. They would recognize the effective reality and truth and store their knowledge in their intelligence. If they would then open their intelligence, the very knowledge store of their intellect and reason, then they would know that when they take such useless pseudo-medicines, they will not be relieved of pain and cured of an ailment or disease by them, but only by their delusion. So they would know that it is not the completely useless homeopathic globules, droplets and bark flower essences that help them, just as it is not the supposedly energetic states obtained from certain flowers and parts of plants, but only they themselves, through their own healthy, clear, positive and life-affirming thoughts and feelings and their trust in themselves.
It is always amazing to me, as I have explained, how you can meaningfully carry out necessary explanations.
Please not again, but now I can ask you about what you only hinted at the other day but did not say. It was about many fires that will burn. What did you mean by that?
Yes, I wanted to talk about that, but I fell out of the concept because you were disturbed by a long telephone conversation. Quetzal had instructed me to give you further instructions regarding the forest work to be done and also to point out that extreme caution should be exercised when burning useless broken wood etc. in the forest area. Because hot summer days were approaching, it should also be ensured and controlled that strangers do not walk around in the center forest, because it is to be feared that hostile or careless and irresponsible persons could ignite and start fires in the forest, as he had found out elsewhere. However, it would be the case that fires would be caused by carelessness, especially in northern areas of Germany, where, however, fires would also be set maliciously and wantonly, also as a result of confused political thinking by politically hostile persons who wanted to take revenge by fiercely destroying forest areas with regard to wrong political decisions and machinations. According to Quetzal, persons with pyromaniac tendencies will also become active, which will lead to several and very extensive forest fires, as he has fathomed with foresight. However, it will not be recognized, or only in rare cases, if at all, that this will be arson. This is because it is usually assumed that it would be a case of heat inflammation as a result of the drought. However, he explained that southern states could also be affected by this, as under certain circumstances Switzerland could also be affected as a result of heat and drought, but the center's forest area would also be at risk, which is why he warns against this and points out that caution is advised and foreign forest goers should be turned away.
Thanks, also to Quetzal. So I will point out the warning to Jacobus as the person responsible for the forest. But while we are at it, or rather because Quetzal mentioned politics, I also have something to say about it. Although I have already mentioned my view a few times in our private conversations, which has hardly ever or never been recorded in official conversations. Therefore, today I would like to officially address two things that I see in the following light from my point of view and my considerations. In many countries, but especially in Germany and Switzerland, propaganda for electric cars is being carried out by various government agencies and state leaders, precisely because the CO2 guzzlers or the vehicles powered by petrol and diesel oil are to be avoided and put out of operation. That would be all well and good if that were possible, but it cannot be done by replacing all vehicles with electric ones. This is because the excessive use of electric vehicles would create new and even more precarious and worse problems, and thus the devil would be cast out with the Beelzebub. And this because the new problems will be based on the fact that the shortage of electricity, which already exists today due to the insanity of gross overpopulation, will continue to increase enormously and ultimately lead to an electricity collapse, which in the very last resort could degenerate into a catastrophe. So new and more nuclear power plants will probably be built again, because this is ultimately the only solution due to the short-sightedness and irresponsibility of those responsible and will in future be an even greater danger to humanity than before. Chernobyl and Fukushima are only the best-known catastrophes of nuclear power plants and other nuclear facilities so far, but the world's population usually knows little or nothing about what really goes on and runs in this field and how many malfunctions effectively occur again and not infrequently expose radioactive substances. In this respect, I will look up a list from Wikipedia and add it to the end of our conversation. Of course, huge areas could also be covered with solar collectors for the generation of electrical energy, thus rendering fertile land unusable that is needed for the cultivation of foodstuffs. Forests could also be cleared and destroyed for this purpose, and their oxygen production could also be choked off. But the demand for electrical energy could not be met with all this. This is also not the case with huge wind turbines in bodies of water, such as the oceans, and also not with wind farms on the land, because everything that will be done in the future, in this respect or otherwise, will result in a new increase in catastrophes that will destroy nature, fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere and the climate, and will continue to do so at an ever faster rate. However, no thought is given to this or to the resulting consequences, just as, for example, no thought is given to the fact that due to the further, already criminal increase in global overpopulation, more and more electrical energy and food, means of transport, all kinds of consumer goods and other things are needed. Just what I have said so far, while elsewhere, however, everything imaginable continues to be destroyed, annihilated and wiped out, as well as nature, fauna and flora are harassed by poisons and rubbish of all kinds, and thus the atmosphere and the climate continue to be negatively affected and even destroyed more and more. The responsible, stupid, pompous and pretentious people in the governments do not want to and cannot think about this, nor do their vassals and the howling environmentalists as well as the shouting juveniles and climate demonstrators and the likewise shouting part of the population, because all of them, due to their non-learning and non-recognition, are neither capable of their intellect nor their reason. And that means that all of the climate demonstrators go blindly through the world and do not see how miserable nature, fauna and flora really are, because they cluck like chickens over everything and in their heedlessness perceive nothing at all. The effective fact is that they are all incapable of perceiving reality and its truth and of recognizing what is fact, but they try to conceal this by putting on the big show and demonstrating about something or by doing so as uninformed followers, but they do not know and have no idea what the real facts are that are being demonstrated about. So all these human beings, the young adolescents and the shouters, the demonstrators and the howlers, are in no way aware of the real causes and the destruction, annihilation and extinction that has already been caused worldwide with regard to the planet, the whole of nature and its fauna and flora. Not a single young or old human being participating in the climate demonstrations has any idea that all the natural events that are already similar to the end of the world can be traced back to the enormous and long overflowing mass of overpopulation and its degenerate machinations that are destroying the whole of nature. Nor are they able to foresee what the future will bring and how things will get much worse, including the big players who call themselves climate and weather specialists and out themselves as know-it-alls. So they are stupid because they do not stimulate their intellect or reason, do not educate them and cannot foresee how all evil and the resulting misery and distress of human beings will increase more and more. This also in relation to the coming storms created by the machinations of overpopulation, which, as I remember, Sfirth had announced and predicted for the year 2019 all over the world, that from this year onwards the whole thing would inexorably increase and intensify more and more. He also said that the primordial storms would cause more and more violent floods, and that afterwards, when the waters receded, insect plagues would emerge from them. He also spoke of the African and ancient Egyptian plagues of locusts shifting steadily northwards and thus towards Europe as a result of a planetary change, although I think that by planetary change he must have meant climate change at the time, although I do not recall him using that term. I also worked out Sforth's predictions at that time and wrote them as appeals, which were then corrected by my two teachers, Karl Graf and Gustav Lehmann, and together with Pastor Zimmermann were also translated into English and French and typed up. With the help of my teacher Gustav Lehmann, I was then able to reproduce everything with the school's reprinting machine and send it worldwide to hundreds of media, namely newspapers, magazines, radio stations and important organizations all over the world, for which both teachers and Pastor Zimmermann provided me with the necessary addresses, to which Professor Jung also contributed some. That everyone was fully on my side was arranged by your father Sforth with Pastor Zimmermann, who in turn agreed with my first teacher, Karl Graf, and then also with Gustav Lehmann, to help me. However, I was only told that my teacher Karl Graf was also in contact with Professor C.G. Jung and that he approved of all the activities and also contributed financially to everything when I had finished the 6th grade and had to go to teacher fair in the 7th grade. Pastor Zimmermann and my teachers Gustav Lehmann and Karl Graf supported me in every way, but I was not allowed to talk about it because silence had to be maintained. If the whole thing had become public knowledge at that time, there would have been a huge row in Bulak among the municipal authorities, the school authorities and the church authorities, and certainly also among the population, and all three would have been frowned upon and ostracized and removed from office. What would have happened to Professor Jung, moreover, would probably have been that he would have been labeled a madman. Everyone's help was extremely important, also with regard to the purchase of the envelopes and the postage, which all three of them and also Professor Jung paid for, because I myself had no money and could not have paid for the whole thing. Today, however, I think I am allowed to talk about it and openly say how and what everything was back then, because all those involved have long since passed away, as have their wives and direct descendants. Well, again I deviated, because I wanted to say that Sforth had predicted that from the year 2019 onwards, climate conditions will increase worldwide and drastic and violent storms will hit the Earth more and more frequently, triggering great landslides, debris flows and massive rocks and mud avalanches from mountain areas. The entire American continent and Europe will also not be spared. For the time being, however, South and Central America, then also North America and also large parts of Asia, but especially China, will be affected as never before. Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Southern Europe and Northern Europe will also be affected by severe storms on a large scale. Switzerland will also be severely affected, although the north and east of the country will be particularly hard hit by severe storms in the coming months. In Europe, however, Switzerland and Germany and the rest of the north will be particularly affected by primeval storms, as Sforth predicted. As far as the machinations of the earthlings around climate change are concerned, the ignorant Greta Thunberg from Sweden has set a stone rolling that shows the pathological stupidity of those earthlings who take part in the whole climate demonstration hype or even support it. But this also includes all those who skulk around Greta Thunberg and can benefit from it in some way. and the consequences that result and spread from the whole thing, those cannot yet be surveyed. But I can also see that Greta is in fact being abused and exploited by calculating figures, also for their own personal prestige and profit. And this is done by dirty selfish elements, celebrities with special status and name, such as artists, rulers, clergy, up to the Pope and other cult leaders of other religions, but also by actors or other allegedly outstanding personalities and busybodies. In addition, there are all those figures who have no knowledge whatsoever of the real cause of climate change or who deny it in a know-it-all manner, who are also indifferent, arrogant and unteachable as a result of megalomania and greed for profit, but who also incite and steer against those who sensibly point out the effective reality and truth of the whole thing, which they can neither perceive nor understand. Greta, however, does not perceive all this, does not notice and also does not understand it in her naivety, and her morals are destroyed. The 16-year-old girl, Greta Tintinelli Leonora Ernman Thunberg, born on the 3rd of January 2003, is just a child shamefully abused for publicity, nastily steered to her doings, whereby notable celebrities such as rulers, religionists and clergy of all kinds, actors, artists, environmentalists, scientists, media workers, philosophers, ideologists and many others increasingly profile themselves as do-gooders in order to let their flickering light shine high in public again. It is just as inevitable that Greta will sooner or later take pleasure in all the hype surrounding her, and that she will somehow fall prey to delusions of grandeur and a feeling of importance, making her arrogant, as it is also inevitable that she will not recognize and understand that she is being exploited by many of her helpers for their own profit and desire to be big. And what Greta first caused in an innocent, clueless and certainly honest way with her one-child demonstration for the climate, and that climate demonstrations arose from it worldwide, mainly by juveniles, will probably only be like a soap bubble that will burst at the appropriate time. As is already the case now, everything will also continue in the old style afterwards and become even worse with all the destruction, annihilation and extinction on the whole planet, on this planet itself and in relation to the whole of nature and its fauna and flora. And for this, overpopulation with all its irresponsible degeneracy will continue to bear the blame as it always has, whereby through its unstoppable growth, with every single newborn earthling, all destructions, annihilations and exterminations worldwide will massively increase according to the food, energy and commodity requirements etc. of every newborn earthling, thus making everything as a whole unstoppably worse. Therefore, what is sensibly dismantled, avoided, forbidden and put out of action, is immediately made a pig again by each new birth of a new earthling. This is because every newborn has a need for all kinds of things to sustain its life and its entire livelihood, as it has always had to be created in an environmentally and climate-destructive way. And this is because there are no other, new, better techniques and possibilities, only the old ones, which damage the environment, nature, fauna and flora, the atmosphere and the climate. So everything remains the same, even if one thing or another is banned, no longer produced or simply no longer used. Subsequently, everything and anything is continued in the old style, in nefariousness. The whole of nature, fauna and flora is poisoned, destroyed, annihilated and exterminated with many kinds of toxic substances. And this goes on for so long and in such a way that everything necessary for life no longer exists, and human beings themselves reach the point of extinction and disappear from the planet. This, If those madmen in the governments, who are sick and obsessed with their delusions of grandeur, war, might and terror, do not blow up the earth first, pulverize it and wipe out everything as if it had never existed. All that has been said so far with regard to the main topic of climate change and climate demonstrations and overpopulation is only one thing, for there is another matter at hand, namely with regard to politics, which in dealing with peoples and governing has reached a state worldwide that has obviously fallen back into antediluvian machinations of subjugating peoples and murderous as well as roaring tribalism. If we look at the individual states in this respect, there is more or less no one to be seen that would not have to be called dictatorial and thus undemocratic, except for Switzerland, which is the only country that maintains a semi-democracy, and the people can therefore determine many things, unfortunately also not all, themselves. But what is not yet, may yet become one day, because Switzerland has all the possibilities to do so, provided, however, that the responsible rulers and the entire Swiss people do not ultimately allow themselves to be forced by their own stupidity even further and finally into the insidious clutches of the EU dictatorship. But exactly this danger exists, because not only a crustum part of the population is addicted to an EU dictatorship accession delusion, but also some irresponsible people in the Council of States, the National Council and even in the Federal Council. Once again, I have strayed from what I actually wanted to address, namely the US-American tramp Trump, who, in my opinion, is getting stupider and stupider, has no real good education and also suffers from a lack of sense and reason. For when I look at and judge his whole demeanor, such as his imbecilic talking around as well as his fickleness, his error of judgment, which he repeatedly revokes and replaces with new nonsensical orders or has to correct them, then I am horrified. Also, his total incapacity and stupidity with regard to a correct and valuable assessment of many things, such as his dealings with political opponents, as in North Korea, China, Russia and Persia, as well as his imbecilic behavior and rumblings against Turkey, etc., destroy all possibilities for peaceful and reasonable negotiations. Consequently, no really valuable consensus can be worked out. On the contrary, he has made himself a world clown and a laughingstock by his stupidity, but also a world danger with regard to the evocation of another world war, which he is about to instigate over China and Russia, for already his imbecilic machinations and speeches have progressed to such an extent that what can still somehow be called loose and tottering world peace is threatened to a crass degree.
I completely agree with everything you have said, revealed and explained, but I find it particularly disgraceful that a child is so irresponsibly abused by celebrities etc. for selfish purposes. And I find it equally disgraceful that only in this day and age, as the catastrophes are already spreading across the earth, an innocent child is perceived and even exalted in public, who is in no way aware of the real facts regarding climate destruction and its preceding causes. This, while you already in the 1940s and 1950s, with the help of your comrades in arms, your two teachers, Pastor Zimmerman and Professor Jung, drew the attention of hundreds of media, radio stations, newspapers, magazines, authorities, governments and organizations worldwide with your predictions to what is now happening worldwide and fulfilling your predictions. But there are also the further horrors to be mentioned which my father's faith foretold, namely the blatant moral changes which are taking place in the immense mass of Earth human beings, as well as the ever-increasing inability of the heads of state to govern. You wrote something about this yourself in the 1940s and, with the help of your faithful, sent it to many media, offices and governments as well as to various organizations worldwide, as I know from my father's annals, and perhaps I will bring you some of it one day, so that you can also publish something about this, because in this respect, too, everything is getting worse all the time. According to my father's predictions, you have also written something about the terrorist organizations that have emerged and are continuing to emerge, of which there will be news, such as in relation to the sectarian criminal organization Islamic State, whose originator, leader and caliphate proclaimer, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is, contrary to all assumptions and claims, still alive and secretly giving his orders and pulling his strings. As you once said, his newly elaborated strategy is extremely devious, because it is based on recruiting young women for the IS, training them and sending them all over the world as covert or secret assassins, who are then to spread fear and terror through widespread bloody, deadly and destructive attacks, for which the first beginnings already exist and which are ultimately intended to spread terror further. It is also worth mentioning that terror is being exercised against Switzerland, namely by the EU dictatorship with the so-called Framework Treaty, which is constructed in such a devious way that Switzerland will lose its complete independence if it is signed and thus ratified as a result of ignorance, unreason and stupidity on the part of the ignorant or EU dictatorship supporters. If the treaty were to be signed in a binding manner, this would be the end of Swiss legal security, because it would be annulled as quickly as possible by the arbitrary will of the EU dictatorship. The insidiousness of this treaty is, in fact, aimed at driving Switzerland, without rights, into this dictatorship and thereby driving the Swiss population into EU citizenship. This would also invalidate the mutual negotiations, which are called bilateral, but which from the very beginning have served and continue to serve the sole purpose of subjecting Switzerland and its people to the EU dictatorship. If this were to happen, Switzerland and its people would be hopelessly under the thumb of the EU dictatorship and would be severely punished if any EU dictatorship decrees etc. were not observed. This fact, however, was not recognized from the very beginning of the first bilateral negotiations by the part of those responsible for the government in question, as well as by many to this day, whose intellect and reason were and still are too uneducated to recognize the reality and truth hidden in all treaties with the EU dictatorship. With the upcoming Framework Treaty, which is now being renamed, if Switzerland were to sign and ratify it as a result of ignorance, irrationality and thus stupidity on the part of the Swiss government, Switzerland and the entire people would automatically become EU dictatorship vassals and would inevitably become subject to EU dictatorship law and thus inevitably also to EU dictatorship jurisdiction. Another inevitable consequence would be that the constitution and the semi-democracy and neutrality, as well as the independence and the alliance of cantons of Switzerland would be declared null and void, abolished and forbidden, as well as the independence, self-determination and ultimately the statehood, and that Switzerland and its people, as a vassal of the EU dictatorship, would have to pay billions and billions more to the dictatorship every year. That is also already certain, as is the fact that Switzerland and its people would no longer have any right whatsoever, neither to decide for themselves nor to decide anything through elections, nor with regard to independent judicial measures of any kind against undesirable migrants as well as criminals and criminals, whereby the EU dictatorial death penalty decided in Lisbon would inevitably also affect Switzerland and the Swiss people. By concluding the Framework Treaty, which could not be more insidious, Switzerland would also lose all its domestic competences and all conceivable communal and state instruments, which would make Switzerland just as incapable in terms of domestic policy as it is in terms of foreign policy. These are the expected effective facts of the future for Switzerland and the Swiss population if the devious Framework Treaty of the EU dictatorship were to be signed and ratified. This however, should be prevented, contrary to all EU dictatorship supporters, but this can only be done if Switzerland, respectively its politicians and all upright and righteous people of the Helvetic government, as well as the majority of the Swiss people, who are fond of the like-minded honorable and worthy politicians and rulers, take care that this dictatorial framework treaty is not signed and not ratified. To this end, it is also necessary that the Swiss people raise their voices and de facto speak and determine what must and must not be, as is also the duty of all righteous politicians, the National Council and the Council of States, as well as at the highest level, the Federal Council, in opposition to those who are treacherously willing to sell out Switzerland to the EU dictatorship, as you sometimes express.
What you say is all well and good, but unfortunately it is the case that most human beings, so also the Swiss you addressed, do not dare to express themselves freely in public with regard to their opinions. The majority of human beings are afraid to say in public what effectively moves them and corresponds to their opinion, which is why they also do not make use of the freedom of opinion as it is laid down in their Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 10th of December 1948 equals Article 19. Freedom of expression and information is stated in the following resolution.
Everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers.
The majority of human beings fear official, governmental and popular abuse, reprisals, legal proceedings and violence against their own personalities if they expose their opinions in public. Admittedly, this is actually what I still want to say, even if some will feel offended by it and will express themselves disparagingly about me and my words, an Achilles heel and thus a huge lack of self-confidence, a personal inadequacy and also cowardice, which on the one hand impairs the well-being of society and ultimately, in terms of Switzerland and its constitution, also democracy. And the fact that in the process the various political parties pull against each other and make a pig of each other instead of working together in a good way and creating valuable consensuses with each other, this also impairs democracy. And this is unfortunately the case because illogical and ill-considered ideologies and know-it-alls prevail in practically all parties, which want to be realized and enforced with all violence through a personal striving for power and wanting to exercise power on the part of the respective authors of the ideas and know-it-alls. This makes it impossible for all those righteous politicians and rulers to be able to bring to bear every effectively well and correctly thought out fact for the good of the state, democracy and the people. And this is the case in every respect, so also with regard to state financial administration, which I will cite as an example another time. This is the case with the Federal Finance Commissioner, Federal Councillor Early Moore, whom I respect personally, which I also want to say openly, who, according to the annual financial statement, can report several billion less expenditure than planned, which could have been used to pay off the state's debts, but which was rejected. This is only because the self-important and stupid, precisely those who cannot form and therefore also cannot use their intellect and reason, and consequently were able to impose their know-it-all attitude in order to squander the billions saved stupidly on unnecessary things. Well, to express a clear, good, logical, correct and necessary opinion in public, I think, should actually be the basic duty of every citizen, but this is frowned upon out of fear. So exactly the right thing is not done, because the majority of the population only runs a big mouth at home, in their circle of friends or in the pub, Consequently, the political parties have to come up with their good or crazy ideas more or less on their own. But the fact that the majority of citizens have the courage to publicly state their personal views and opinions and offer suggestions for change in political and governmental behavior is illusory for the whole majority. So nothing at all happens in this respect, which means that the majority of the Swiss people never publicly address governmental and purely political issues, nor laws, bans, ordinances, treaties, the economy and migration. So also the army, as well as the overall development of all necessities in all conceivable possible relations, areas and unavoidable things of logical, expedient and necessary progress fall flat when it comes to publicly speaking out and standing up for it. The majority of the population is geared towards always doing the wrong thing, like not freely and openly and on their own initiative and responsibility in any way, such as through writings, the internet, newspapers and magazines, television, periodicals etc., and just according to today's possibilities of all kinds, to bring their own view, idea, consideration and opinion to the public. But when someone summons up the courage, out of a need, or because someone is in the background agitating for it, as in the case of the child Greta Thunberg, to do something himself and even to demonstrate publicly, then the bulk of all the stupid, even initiative and courageless people run after them like a flock of sheep, bleating, roaring, howling, yelping and screaming, and rise up, thinking big, to heroism. But once the hype of demonstrating is over, no matter what the demonstration is about and what it is for, of which the demonstrators themselves usually do not understand anything anyway, and the organizers also start from false premises, everything fizzles out again and, as always, the men only make their fists in their trouser pockets and the women their fists under their aprons, if they still wear one at all. It is also to be said that the ideas, opinions and perceptions etc. of the majority of the population are just as drastically divergent as they are among the parties, the politicians and in the government itself, whereby in the highest government office there is a concordance of opinion which demands from the bottom up that all those in government are of one opinion, but if not, that the person in question who does not allow himself to be forced into concordance is then sacked, as was the case with Christoph Blocher. As far as the parties and the rulers themselves are concerned, it must be said that those of them who think they are the greatest and the most progressive, and who believe that they have eaten wisdom with shovels, and that they therefore own it, are the stupidest. In their stupidity, in their lack of understanding and reason, they consider themselves empowered to degrade their fellow politicians, co-governors and party members to self-appointed enemies and to drive them out of their positions with all possible dirty means, or to discipline them in such a way that they become sneak existences and say yes and amen to everything, contrary to their own opinion. In this way, every reasonable and righteous human being, whether politician, party supporter or government official, as well as citizen, is deprived of any legitimacy and any right to express his or her very own personal opinion and to put forward his or her own, not infrequently good ideas and valuable results of reflection, views and proposals. This is because, as a result of using their intellect and reason, they are dissenters and further thinkers who, for this, are unrestrainedly put down through the teeth and disqualified as do-gooders, imbeciles and idiots, or driven to controversy by polarization, whereby a social societal differentiation and thus also a reinforcement of differences of opinion is created, whereby the bullied are driven to despair and are expected to give up their position.
I can also only agree with what you have just said. But now, Edward, my dear friend, I must end our conversation for today, for duty calls me.
Just one more question, if it is still possible?
Yes.
Thanks. You once said that induction cookers were harmful to health in some circumstances and even caused fatal ailments.
That is indeed the case, because the magnetic radiation from induction cookers is harmful to Earth human beings and causes serious health problems, including leukemia. But now I really must do my duty. Goodbye, Edward, my friend.
Goodbye too, Ptaah. Now I will look up the list from Wikipedia and add it here.
That will be good for information aid.